All right, so, you wrote in and you were super curious about Crime and Punishment, right? Like, what's the connection between this intense, gritty Russian novel and this whole expansive cosmic philosophy of the Law of One?
Yeah, and honestly, at first glance, it does seem like we're dealing with two totally different worlds here.
Yeah, total opposites. You've got this tormented student, Raskolnikov, in 19th century St. Petersburg.
A society riddled with poverty and suffering.
Yeah, and these incredibly detailed descriptions of the city, the grime, the claustrophobia.
And then you've got the Law of One, these channeled teachings about consciousness, cosmic evolution, different densities of reality.
Right, alien civilizations, higher beings, the whole shebang.
Yeah,
But we're going to take a deep dive here, right?
exactly. And see if we can find some unexpected connections, some underlying threads. Because believe it or not, the intensely personal struggles that Dostoevsky lays bare in Crime and Punishment might just illuminate some of the broader principles that the Law of One explores on a cosmic scale.
So let's start with Dostoevsky's world. I mean, this novel is so raw, so visceral. You highlighted some pretty heavy moments, like Marmeladov.
Oh, Marmeladov.
Right. That scene where he confesses his utter destitution to Raskolnikov in the tavern, how he's driven to drink, how his family's suffering.
And yet he still clings to this profound love for his family, this desperate hope for redemption.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. And then you have Katerina Ivanovna, his wife, her decline into illness, poverty. She's almost consumed by it all.
And she's so proud, clinging to this sense of dignity amidst the squalor.
Exactly. And then you have Raskolnikov himself, the tormented soul at the heart of it all.
Okay, so let's talk about him. He's this former student, brilliant, but also incredibly alienated, isolated.
And deeply troubled.
Yeah, he commits this horrific crime, the murder of the pawnbroker. But what's really fascinating is how Dostoevsky delves into his psychology, his motivations. He's not just some cold-blooded killer.
No, not at all. We see him wrestling with these elaborate intellectual justifications for his act.
Like his idea of the extraordinary man.
Right, this theory that some individuals are somehow above conventional morality, that they have the right to transgress the law for some greater purpose.
And it's chilling, the way he tries to convince himself that he's one of these exceptional beings.
And that's where it gets really interesting when we bring in the Law of One, this concept of free will distortion.
Okay, now that's a bit of a head-scratcher for someone who's not steeped in the Law of One.
Right, so basically, free will distortion happens when we use our inherent freedom of choice in a way that creates imbalance or harm.
And this often stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of our true nature and how we're interconnected with everything and everyone.
Exactly. The Law of One emphasizes the idea that we're all part of this unified consciousness, this one infinite creator. And when we act from a place of separation, of ego, we create these distortions.
So Raskolnikov's belief that he's somehow above the law, that he's exempt from the consequences of his actions, that's a prime example of this free will distortion.
Absolutely. He's operating under this illusion of separation, this belief that his will can be exerted without affecting the web of existence. And the novel really shows us the devastating consequences of that kind of thinking.
So how does the Law of One approach these kinds of situations, like when individuals or even entire civilizations make choices that lead to harm?
Well, one of the fascinating things in the Law of One is this idea of the confederation of planets.
The Confederation.
Yeah, it's like this collective of advanced civilizations that are working to help guide the evolution of consciousness. But they operate under a strict principle of non-interference.
Non-interference.
Right. They can offer guidance, wisdom, but they can't directly intervene in the choices that individuals or societies make. They have to respect free will.
That's interesting. So even when they see beings going down a destructive path, they can't just swoop in and fix things.
No, the understanding has to come from within. It has to be a genuine evolution of consciousness. And that's why Raskolnikov's journey is so compelling, so relevant.
Yeah, because he's forced to confront the consequences of his actions. He goes through this agonizing process of guilt, paranoia, psychological torment.
And it's through that suffering, that inner turmoil, that he ultimately starts to grapple with the true nature of his actions.
So it's like his own internal struggle is a microcosm of this larger cosmic principle of learning through experience, through the consequences of our choices.
Right. The Law of One talks about the importance of balancing the positive and negative charges within ourselves.
Hmm.
And you can see how Raskolnikov's internal conflict reflects that struggle.
So what does that mean, balancing positive and negative charges? Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. In the law of one, positive and negative aren't seen as good and bad in a moral sense.
Okay, so it's not like good vibes versus bad vibes.
Not exactly. It's more about the direction of energy flow. Positive energy is associated with unity, love, compassion, connection,
Okay,
while negative energy is more about separation, control, the desire to dominate.
I see.
And we all have both within us. It's about finding that balance, that harmony.
And Raskolnikov is clearly out of balance.
Definitely. He's consumed by guilt, self-loathing, fear. He's cut off from any sense of love or connection. And that's part of what fuels his suffering.
And that idea of connection ties into the concept of densities, right?
Yep.
Which the law of one talks about a lot.
Exactly. Densities are like different levels of consciousness, different vibrational frequencies.
Okay, so it's not like physical locations.
No, it's more about the way we perceive and experience reality. The law of one describes Earth as being in third density, which is the density of self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
Right. It's where we develop our sense of individual identity, where
Yeah.
we start to grapple with concepts of good and evil, right and wrong.
But we're also moving towards fourth density, which is described as the density of love and understanding.
Yeah. And that transition is a big one. It involves a shift from a primarily self-centered perspective to a more universal, interconnected awareness.
And the law of one talks about how this transition is pretty challenging.
Oh, yeah. It's not a walk in the park. It requires us to confront our shadows, our limitations, our fears. And those scattered thought forms that you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
those represent the conflicting beliefs, the misunderstandings that hold us back from embracing that higher level of consciousness.
So Raskolnikov's internal struggles, his psychological fragmentation, that could be seen as a reflection of this larger challenge of evolving consciousness.
Absolutely. He's a microcosm of the challenges we all face in third density.
And what about his ultimate path to redemption? The fact that he confesses his crime, accepts punishment, how does that tie into the law of one's ideas about healing and transformation?
Well, the law of one talks about this idea of purification of the self.
Purification.
Right. And it's not about punishment in a moralistic sense.
Yeah.
It's more about facing the consequences of our actions, acknowledging the harm we've caused.
So it's like a process of clearing out those blockages, those distortions, so we can move towards greater balance and harmony.
Exactly. And it's often painful. It requires deep introspection, a willingness to confront our shadow side. But it's through that process that true healing can occur.
And you see that in Raskolnikov's journey. He goes through this intense period of suffering, but it's through that suffering that he eventually comes to a place of acceptance, of remorse.
And that confession, that act of taking responsibility, could be seen as a crucial step towards aligning himself with the principles of universal love and interconnectedness.
So even though he committed this horrific act, there's still potential for redemption.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of the law of one's perspective. It doesn't condemn. It recognizes that we all have the capacity for growth, for evolution, no matter how far we've strayed.
And that brings us to another fascinating concept from the Law of One, the Wanderers.
Ah, the wanderers.
These are beings from other planets, other densities, who choose to incarnate on Earth to help us evolve.
Right, and they often forget their origins, their mission. They have to penetrate the veil of third density illusion. Yeah, it's like this kind of fog that obscures our true nature, our connection to the one infinite creator.
So it's like they're coming here to help us remember who we really are.
Exactly. And in a way, Raskolnikov's journey mirrors that. He's lost in this illusion of separation, of exceptionalism. And his journey is about breaking through that illusion, remembering his connection to humanity.
So he's kind of like an accidental wanderer.
You could say that. He's forced to confront the same fundamental questions of consciousness, of free will, of interconnectedness.
Now, the Law of One also talks about this group called the Orion Group.
Ah, yes, the Orion Group.
And they're described as representing a more negative polarity, seeking to control and manipulate others.
Right. They operate through fear, deception, the desire to dominate. And it's interesting to consider some of the characters in Crime and Punishment in light of this concept.
Like Lucian, for example.
Yes, Lucian, with his cold, calculating nature, his schemes to exploit Raskolnikov's family.
He's so self-serving, so manipulative.
Exactly. And his motivations really resonate with the Orion Group's tactics. He thrives on creating imbalance, separation, using others for his own gain.
So it's like Dostoevsky, perhaps unknowingly, was tapping into these same archetypal forces that the Law of One describes on a cosmic level.
It's certainly a compelling possibility, and it speaks to the power of great literature to illuminate these profound truths about human nature and our place in the universe.
So what can we take away from all of this? From this deep dive into crime and punishment and the law of one?
Well, for me, it highlights the incredible interconnectedness of everything, how the struggles of one individual soul, the choices we make, the consequences we face, all ripple outwards, affecting the whole web of existence.
And it reminds us that we're not just isolated beings separate from the universe. We're part of something much larger, something incredibly vast and complex.
And ultimately, we have the power to choose, to act from a place of love, of unity, or to perpetuate separation and suffering.
And those choices matter. They have real consequences, both for ourselves and for the world around us.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, by understanding the struggles of a character like Raskolnikov, by exploring the wisdom of teachings like the Law of One, we can gain a little more insight into our own choices, our own journey towards greater understanding and compassion.
Yeah. And for all of you listening, I think that's the real invitation here, to look at your own life, your own choices through the lens of these profound ideas, and to ask yourself, what kind of impact do I want to have on the world? What kind of energy do I want to bring to the web of existence?
It's a question worth pondering.
It definitely is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep those questions coming. We'll be back soon with more explorations, more connections, more food for thought.